This module is about gaining the right to ask questions. So, in the last module, we talked about establishing rapport by saying, I'm just curious before we get started, and asking them about themselves. The next step is the information gathering phase. And as I mentioned before, this is the most important phase of the sales process. It's where your sale gets made or lost. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we have the right to ask questions. Now, when you set an appointment to speak with somebody about your product or service, it's kind of implied that you're going to be asking some questions. I don't think there's a single prospect in the world that doesn't understand that you're going to be asking questions. But we want to make 100% certain that we have that right. And the way I suggest you do that is once the person starts talking about themselves and they finish up with, and that's how I became, whatever they became, then you want to say these words. Would it help if I tell you a little bit about my company? Or would it help if I tell you a little bit about Jeff Goldberg and Associates? Or would it help if I go first? Any of those are excellent lead-ins because the prospect now thinks they're about to get the sales pitch, and that's what they think you're there for. That's not what you're going to do. What you're going to do is answer their unasked question in order to gain the right to ask questions yourself. And the reason I phrase it that way is because I have a belief. If you ask me a question and I answer your question, I now have the right to ask you questions too. And that's exactly what I want to do. You see, the truth is, I really just want to interrogate. I want to go in and ask question after question after question and get all the answers so I can make a presentation based on facts, based on valid, good information. But I want to make sure that I have the right to ask those questions first. Even though it's implied, I want to ensure that I have the right. So because turnaround is fair play, and if you ask me a question, I have the right to ask you questions too, I'm going to get you to ask me a question so that I can then answer it, thereby gaining the right to ask questions of you. And the way I'll do that is by exactly what I just said. Would it help if I tell you a little bit about my company? Everybody, I mean everybody, is going to say yes. And at that point, what you want to do is you want to give your brief commercial. The person didn't actually ask you about your company, but when you say, would it help if I tell you a little bit about my company, or would it help if I go first, and they say yes, it's now time to answer their unasked question with your brief commercial. If you don't know what a brief commercial is, it's also known as an elevator pitch or a 30-second commercial. It's crucial in sales that we have a good brief commercial. And that's exactly what it is. It's not telling people everything about everything. You're simply telling people some basic facts about who you are, who your company is, and how we help people like you so that you can now ask a bunch of questions. And in order to put together a good brief commercial, one of the things you should be able to do is answer these questions. First of all, what is it that I sell? What do I really sell? Secondly, what makes us different than the competition? And finally, my favorite one, while we're not typically the least expensive option, people choose us because, and you have to fill in the blank at the end. Now, first of all, if you are the least expensive option, which is rare when I work with companies, then you would say, we're typically the least expensive option and people choose us because we're the least expensive option, or whatever other benefits you bring to the table. But let's start out with the first one. You have to answer the question, what do I sell? And when I ask salespeople that question, most of the time they get the answer wrong. For example, a lot of the work I've done over the years is training salespeople who sell advertising. It's not that I went after that niche, it's just one refers another, refers another, refers another. So I know a bit about the world of advertising sales. What do you think when I ask a team of advertising salespeople, what do you sell? What do you think they say? Well, if the answer was they say they sell advertising, you're 100% right. When I ask a group of advertising salespeople, what do you sell? They inevitably say, I sell advertising. But that's not right. What advertising salespeople sell is making the doorbell ring, making the cash register ring. It's not the advertising that they're selling, it's what the advertising does. So in order to put together a good brief commercial, you not only have to know what you sell, you have to know what it does for people. Do I sell sales training? Well, I guess so, but my hunch is this. My clients, other than from a very ugly picture standpoint, and maybe from a bad human resources standpoint, my clients could probably not care less if I stood on my head naked whistling Dixie all day long in front of their sales team, as long as at the end of the day, their salespeople got more appointments with decision makers, had a shorter sales cycle, and closed more business more profitably. Sales training just happens to be the delivery method that does those things. So advertising salespeople are not selling advertising, they're selling what advertising does. And when you figure this out for yourself, you'll be well on your way to developing your brief commercial. What makes us different than the competition? Not better than the competition, but different. One of the things in sales you want to make sure you never do is knock the competition. You don't want to knock them down. What you want to do is build yourself up. When you put your competition down, it makes you look bad and people stop trusting you. When you build yourself up, when you show the value that you bring to the table, that's when prospects turn themselves into clients. And my favorite is truly, while we're not typically the least expensive option, people choose us because, and then you have to fill in the blank at the end of that. This is such a great thing to say because number one, you're letting them know why people do business with you. And number two, you're telling them this may not be cheap. We're not the cheapest unless you happen to be. I'm certainly not the cheapest. I'm not the cheapest sales coach. I'm not the least expensive sales trainer, consultant, or outsourced sales manager, all the things that I do. There are some people who charge way more for what I do and some who charge way less for what I do. I'm kind of in the middle in my pricing. But I know this for a fact. My prospects, just like your prospects, are not necessarily looking for the cheapest. And by the way, that's what clients typically think, and that's what salespeople typically think. It's all about the price. I'm here to tell you it's not all about the price. If it was all about the price, we'd all be driving 1975 Honda Accords because you can pick one up for $300, maybe $500. They run forever, they're great cars, they're very comfortable. But I meet salespeople all the time driving $90,000 Mercedes. And whenever I ask them, why'd you spend $90,000 on a car instead of $500, the answer is always the same. I like the new car smell, I like a new car warranty. They've got a million reasons why they spent $90,000 more for a car than they needed to. It's because they saw the value in driving a new Mercedes or Lexus or something else rather than a used Honda Accord. While we're typically not the least expensive option, people choose us because, and you've got to be able to fill that in at the end of that blank. Here's an example of a brief commercial, and this is actually my brief commercial that I use on a sales call. You can see it's by nature brief, it's less than a minute, and it sounds like this. Jeff Goldberg and Associates is a sales training and coaching firm. We help organizations like yours achieve measurable and sustainable sales increases. We work with your sales reps and their managers to help them get more appointments with decision makers, shorten their sales cycle, and close more business more profitably. Now, everything we'll do with your firm is based on my personal experience of almost 50 years in sales, sales management, sales training, and coaching. And when you combine that with my background in theater and stand-up comedy, you get someone who's uniquely qualified to work with your team in a way that both entertains and engages them while they learn to sell more effectively. By the way, even though we're not the least expensive option, and we're not, people choose Jeff Goldberg and Associates because when we leave, their salespeople do get more appointments with decision makers, they do have a shorter sales cycle, and they just plain close more business more profitably. That takes about 42 seconds. I didn't time it just now, but that's about right, less than a minute. I quickly am explaining to people, here's who I am, here's who my company is, and here's what we can do for you. And the here's what we can do for you is exactly what your prospect is listening for. What's in it for me? Remember the WIFM that we talked about earlier? They want to know what's in it for me. So we're clearly expressing that to them without giving them the whole presentation, without telling them exactly what we're going to do for them, because remember, we're just gaining the right to ask questions, and that's exactly what we want to do. So now it's time for you to stop the video and write out your brief commercial in the workbook. Remember, it's got to be short. Less than a minute is optimal. Anything over a minute and people are going to lose interest. You want to get right to the bottom line, and this has to be what I call an aha moment. It's got to be crystal clear. There is a technique in sales when it's appropriate to say something that you know is going to get your prospect to say, I'm sorry, I don't really understand. Could you explain a little further? This is not that time. Crystal clear, right to the point. Develop your brief commercial now.